Hello, dears, this is the StorySculpt channel, and you are listening to a story Parbati written by Farkhanda Lodhi and translated by Samina Rahman from the book KAHANI, Short Stories, by Pakistani Women, edited by Aamer Hussein.
Kill.
Was it a voice or an echoing memory?
Kill.
It was advancing. Guns roared, from both sides, from every side, and all round was the reverberating, recurring patriotic anthem.
Kill.
Cannon, aeroplanes, sirens, whistles and the thumping of hearts. Then silence. Churning the silence, dividing consciousness, a cry.
Kill.
A bullet whistled by, barely scraping her shoulder. Protecting her head, she bent over and started walking. The border was a few steps away. She had to get there. No sound but a hissing silence, a storm in the heart and a rumbling at the core of the earth. She tightened her grip on both arms. Another bullet came from one side, from all sides. Rain, noise, fire, heat, thirst. She inched forward, clasping her ears with both hands. Balanced and supported on her arms, she crossed the border before dawn broke. The rumble of the cannon had stopped, but now it grew louder and more rapid. There was still time for the day to break. The distinctive smell of gunpowder surrounded her, the smoke momentarily obscured the morning light. She lay down in the cover of the bushes and tried to breathe deeply. There was no danger of anyone passing by here. If I hear the sound of footsteps or see anyone coming, I'll jump into the canal on the right, she decided with complete calm. For a long time she lay lost in thought, biting her painful, swollen lips. She had so many obstacles to face. The wounds on her knees were oozing fresh blood and she was aware of her chest wounds, stiff with caked dirt. Where can I go in this condition? Her mind kept reflecting. The morning birds had not begun their chorus. Why were they silent? Fire and thunder had swallowed their happy contentment and the world appeared desolate. How quickly the world's beauty had changed to mourning. She was choked by fear and hatred. A wave of revulsion, towards loved ones, strangers, even her own being, ran through her. Her inner self plunged into deeper and deeper darkness. Ran through her. Her inner self plunged into deeper and deeper darkness. The sun refused to come up. Cannonballs thundered and the horizon was lit by temporary flares that would illuminate the sky and then suddenly die down. Each time she heard the rumble she feared a cannonball would land on her. She had chosen a bad spot to stop. Danger was imminent. She moved forwards. Further and further. The dread silence moaned palpably and shouted out, as children were orphaned and widowed women's precious honor was plundered. The rumble of tanks and cars, slogans old and new, noise. People awoke and involved themselves in life's struggles, but her mind was still asleep. Totally paralyzed. How could she go among those people? She was almost naked, covered in blood. Her shirt hung in tatters from her breast. Ashamed of her condition, she hesitated for a fraction and then moved forward with renewed determination. She became conscious of her wounds throbbing. Her awareness grew as she emerged slowly from an unconscious state. Now she was able to register the world of objects around her. The trees standing like spirits in the semi-darkness were really trees and the sun had yet to rise. Despite the smoke, it had risen. The world has to go about its business. In the nearby village, death challenged life and life answered back, resolutely making its way forward. It cannot stop. It must not stop. She kept walking. The village was a few paces away. Not even an ant was visible, the mistreated and angry village curs were barking. Where had the people gone? Silence gripped all. She had reached the village boundaries. Nothing was visible behind the fallen wall. There was nothing in the village to hold back the people. She wanted to weep, over the devastation in the village, over man's helplessness and short-sightedness, or then to return to where she had come from and never set foot in this place again. There was a fierce desolation in her. She thought, the earth is our mother and look at the flames engulfing her breasts, why does she not die? Her sons destroy her, are destroyed themselves, and yet the air resounds with a single cry, kill. This is the game thought up by your wise sons. Oh mother! Maybe I will get killed in this game. If I live I will think long and hard of your condition. I don't have the time now. Elastic time shrinks and expands as in a game. 100 yards away the military jeeps were visible as they arrived and departed. All around were clouds of dust and smoke. Scraps of dry grass were ablaze. The standing ears of grain had been scorched and bony sticks from the old leafless tree were crackling in the flames. She wet her lips with her tongue. How thirsty she was. She would not survive. Her throat prickled with thistles. She was parched. She collapsed half alive on the mound of rubble. The sound of footsteps closer, closer, and closer still, and a voice telling somebody, "Kill her." Yes, yes.
Kill her.
She sat up with lightning speed and tried unsuccessfully to clothe her body. In front of her were two armed soldiers staring at her meaningfully. Their probing looks went straight through her garments, entering her flesh, searching her mind and her heart. Her body stiffened in fear and apprehension of danger. Her power of speech had been usurped and her pupils felt as if they had turned to stone. "Why did you not leave with the village folk? Your condition is not good." Their tone reassured her. There were tears in her eyes.
What can I say?
"I have saved myself from those savage beasts in the last village. I have faced cruelty and violence to mingle with the earth of my land. You are my brothers.
Finish me.
Do me this favor." She spoke effortlessly and the soldiers were in a quandary. Should they silence this talking parrot or allow her to die with her tale of woe locked in her? One of them went running off and returned with a thick cotton blanket, covering her body with it. The soldiers were restless, hesitating to make her fresh, beautiful body their target. Fire was raining down. The air was smoldering. "Do you have any relatives?" one asked.
Let it be, Yar.
Don't waste time. The other shook his head.
Life or death?
The first one persisted.
Whatever you can give.
There was a note of challenge in her tone now and her voice was clear. "That is in God's hands." The soldier looked back. His companion had long since left. He set off. Without another word. She was saved. She lay among a hail of cannon and gunpowder. Nobody came to either rescue or finish her off. The defenders of her country were fighting. Could anything be more reassuring than that? The afternoon went by. She was worn out by thirst and hunger. A small caravan stopped near her with its token presence of men, the women and children strangely subdued. They stood under the shisham tree with terror-stricken faces, children crying in their mothers' laps, their lips dry and pale. Then trucks and other vehicles drove up and the military police herded them in like cattle. A man who looked like an officer gave instructions in low tones. There was not the slightest fatigue visible on his face as he looked confidently around him. The soldiers were going about their work swiftly, their briskness and jokes relieving the atmosphere of sadness. The officer standing next to an old woman said, "Ma. Running away from death, are you? Why don't you stay back? Let a useful man take your place." He laughed. "Oh no, son," she screamed in her vernacular. "I'll tuck myself into a corner." "Is life that precious?" "Yes, son, I don't want to die at the hands of those Kafirs. Death will visit all one day."
Ma.
"This is a chance for martyrdom," the soldier told the old woman. "Martyrdom is a result of one's actions, son. I am useless." "What? Martyrdom is there for me?" Everyone was laughing and work continued as if nothing had happened, as if people had woken up from a night's sleep to find that the morning had dawned on a new age, a new world, and the desire to discover this new world, and apprehension at what they might find, had distracted them all. The women were silent, fear lurking in their eyes. The joy and verve of the men concealed a deep anxiety which compelled the officer to repeatedly look towards the east and the soldiers to herd the women and children like cattle. She was wounded, so she was made to lie down in a jeep. Her face wore the pallor of death and she was being removed to a hospital so she could be revived. She shouted profanities.
"Kill me, no, no, kill me, how will I face my own, no, no. I
am not in a position to return. My brother will commit suicide when he sees me. How will my mother show her face to anyone? I beseech you in the name of the honor of your women, for the sake of your wives' chastity and loyalty, leave me here. Savage beasts have plundered me. Let dogs tear me to pieces. I have no one to call my own now. I don't even belong to myself." She kept babbling and the jeep kept driving at full speed. The two sitting in front paid no heed to her nonsense, treating her like a piece of baggage. It was their responsibility to deliver her to her destination and that was all. The jeep stopped and one man got out. His place was taken up by empty cartons and bundles. The road was full of people. Their emotions brimmed over in the slogans they were shouting. Young boys poked their heads into the jeep and stared and she thought irritably, why doesn't the jeep start? Why was she being transported in this manner? Was it her funeral procession? "This is my funeral procession," she raised her voice and was enraged by the lack of feeling in the man sitting in the front seat. He was refusing to hear her. Has everyone turned to stone? What has happened to all of them? They've all become puppets manipulated by time and politics, she thought, and screamed at the man sitting near her, Are you deaf? I don't have the time. She got up and bent over the front seat. You don't have the time? Not even the time to get rid of me? The man driving the jeep turned round to look and felt her breath on his temples. I won't get rid of you, he said deliberately, because you're young and not bad-looking. Then he changed the subject. Why don't you lie down? Don't add to my problems. She had come to ask him questions, talk to him, and here she was being told off. The jeep kept grinding on. The fresh air revived her slightly. What will you do with me? Pickle you. She kept quiet. There was no reason to say anything further. The jeep entered the compound of a huge building and stopped. Bearers came forward with a stretcher. She descended, spurning all help. All right. Salam. She stopped. Waikum assalam. The man had put on a pair of dark glasses and was looking at her, a woman wrapped in a cotton blanket, encrusted with dirt, hair in disarray and tears streaking the filthy face. She looked like a madwoman. What's your name? The man's heart filled with sympathy and pity for the solitary woman. Nothing. Nothing is no name. Parveen, she answered shortly, lost in thought. Parveen, the man repeated and added, Pina. She smiled interrogatively, as if to say, What is my destination now? The man took off his dark glasses and gave her a deep look. I'm Hassan. Anything I can do for you? Nothing, Parveen answered angrily. She had been disappointed in Hassan. A strange disappointment. All right. Kuda Hafiz. Hassan walked away. Kuda Hafiz. Parveen's hand kept waving for a while. She had softened towards him again, and people looked with surprise at this peasant woman with the appearance of a sadhu, who stood there waving goodbye in such a courteous manner till the jeep was out of view. But there was terror on her face. Pure terror. When she recovered her health, she was transferred from the hospital to the camp. She was irritated when people inquired about her close ones and relatives, turning hysterical on occasions, as if her inner world had been trampled by its experience of terror and injustice. Gradually people stopped asking. In the camp, Parveen attached herself to a widow who loved her like her own daughter. She would spend her whole day in the camp educating the women and children, and people would look at her pityingly. She became everyone's APA. In the morning and evening it was usual for her to sit down with the younger children, who enjoyed their pupillage under her. Anxious mothers, dislocated from their homes, got some respite, and they would sit and speculate in Punjabi with each other. Haine, what a nice girl. What will become of her, one would ask. The other woman, overly emotional and sensitive to Parveen's condition, would strike her breast with both hands and exclaim, Oh, why did the Kafirs plunder her honor? In the camp young girls were being married off every day. Those women who are always on the lookout to marry off all the young girls in the world were on the lookout for a mate for Parveen, but to marry her required courage. The youthful male gaze would chase her the whole day. To escape it, Parveen would complete her daily tasks and, before the evening shadows darkened, leave for the fields and sit perched on the raised boundaries, lost for hours in unknown thoughts. Her eyes would search the distance, then she would return, head bowed, silent, her undulating walk suggestive of a sadhu returning to the city from his retreat. Parveen belonged to all. Everyone would fret on her behalf. Parents would worry as she walked with her dupatta pulled right to her forehead and her gaze lowered, attracting the attention of the simple folk. Mature men would respectfully step aside to allow her to pass. She was now in a position to command deference. She had no desire to achieve fame in her little camp world. She would meet the adults infrequently, spending all her time with the children. Everyone understood her needs. Those who themselves had broken hearts and whose wounds were fresh lacked the courage to probe hers. One evening when she was returning to camp as usual, she met Zainab. She had met and befriended Zainab in the camp. Zainab was around 18 or 20 years old, from a rural background and with a missing father. After displacement, her small family had been located in the camp. She was often seen roaming outside the camp, her eyes and feet running anxiously along the pathways traversing the fields in anticipation of her father. When he returned, they could be settled somewhere, and then Zainab's palms could be reddened with henna. Bad times were upon them. Mothers were always fearful, as Zainab and countless unwed young girls waited with their innumerable hidden desires for their fathers, brothers and would-be bridegrooms whose presence would ensure for them a carefree life. The daughters of Eve desire no more than this, to think beyond it is not possible for these simple village maidens. When news arrives of those who have died, they weep. When the message is of victory and life, they break into smiles. This is the extent of their emotions and their world. Zainab blocked Parveen's path. Appa, you have given up talking about your own people, but do you think they have given up searching for you? Come, there is someone waiting for you there. Parveen was taken aback, and for a moment her sober face was shadowed by fear and terror.
Come, why have you halted?
Parveen took a few faltering steps. She did not address Zainab.
Appa, why are you afraid?
Your relatives will not devour you. It's not your fault. Zainab had drawn her own conclusions from Parveen's confusion. The earth and the sky tilted as she saw Hassan in front of her. The universe began to destruct. There was one thought in her mind: why has he come? Why has he come? Why has he come? Without lifting her eyes or replying to Hassan's greeting, she stood, trembling. Her resolve had abandoned her. She had no idea that she would prove to be so weak. Gradually her lips opened and her eyes lifted. Salam. Why are you so disturbed? I'm all right. Then Hassan began talking. I went to the hospital for some work one day. I asked about you and was told that you had been sent to camp. I happened to be passing this way today and here you are. That is good. He spoke in clipped sentences. Yes, I'm delighted, Parveen responded formally. Zainab had left. You recognize me, don't you? You remember my name? Hassan asked again.
Yes, well, very well.
Hassan kept quiet for a while and then spoke. I don't know why I get the feeling that you're a riddle and I want to decipher this riddle. Although I have no right.
Even then.
Parveen smiled and gave Hassan the kind of look only a woman can. She forgot what she was about to say to him. Her eyes were quizzical. Then she said, for a man each new woman is a riddle. Well, let's talk of something else. Her tone was refined. Parveen, I want to talk to you. Not of war. War is the scourge of God. I want to talk of forgiveness and mercy. I want to dream about peace and friendship with you. Then Hassan kept quiet. Parveen was also silent. The stillness spoke and they listened and understood. All right. I'll go now. I'll come again, God willing, he said as he left. Parveen, in a quandary, stood rooted to the spot, staring. Hassan would come for short visits. They would sit in a grove sharing each other's life stories and the happenings in the world. Parveen talked about her failures and incompetence and sought to convince Hassan of them. It was extremely worrying that Hassan was pursuing her. She would often think of what Hassan was looking for in her. Still, somewhere in Parveen's heart and the deepest recesses of her soul, there was a hidden happiness which, despite her efforts, would spill from her eyes and which Hassan would recognize. Parveen's mind would not accept this happiness. She was not convinced of it. While recounting an incident from his childhood, Hassan said to her, Look, Pina, there are some matters in which one always remains a child. I think I'm still a child. When I was about 5 or 6 I would play in the lane outside. At times one can acquire wonderful things in play, can't one? He wanted the listener's assent while telling his story. Parveen, absorbed in the tale, had forgotten her role. God takes good care of human innocence. One day I found a pearl, coated in mud and dirt. So beautiful and lovely, at least it appeared that way to me. I cleaned it with spit and polished it on my shirt front. How it sparkled! Then I put it in my mouth and played with it. Pina! I still haven't understood, why does one want to swallow the things one likes best? There is a spontaneity in a child's desire which adults learn to repress. But the desire for spontaneity remains. I remember my mother scolded me for this antic and even slapped me. She would say, Heaven knows what filth he picks up and pops into his mouth. I sobbed for such a long time, clutching the pearl in my fist. Why did mother not respect my desire? My tiny consciousness came awake that day and I shed tears of blood. I persuaded my elder sister to sew the pearl on the collar of my coat and hugged it close to me for many days. Perhaps others didn't like it, but I was very happy. Parveen showed her appreciation of this unimportant event with tiny chuckles, and Hassan was revived by the continuous magic of her femininity, falling on him as lightly as rain. The neighboring country had unexpectedly attacked in the night, violating all established norms and practices. Many fronts had been opened up and Hassan had to run from one to another. The army was small and the size of the enemy substantial. One man had to do the work of four. Hassan was a lieutenant, and as in this war more officers were being martyred, Parveen began to fear for Hassan's life and pray for him, let Hassan return safely. Make sure he does. She sometimes felt as if Hassan was her purpose in life, and beyond that purpose there was no other world. He talked a lot whenever he came, his men were pushing back the enemy on all fronts, the enemy was being defeated, and so on. Parveen would sit silently staring at the sky, unmoved by the result. She could hear nothing beyond the sound of Hassan's voice. Hassan was wounded in the arm by a bullet and got 15 days leave, so he took Parveen home. He was living in the midst of love and war, unmindful of what was permitted and what was not. It is death to retreat in conditions of love or war. Hassan was not prepared either to die physically or face the death of his love. His country was winning the war, and it was his personal goal to win his love. A few days later Hassan got married. On her wedding day, Parveen imposed a silence on herself and sat lost in it. Despite Hassan's insistence, she couldn't describe her feelings. Then slowly a complete change came over her. She turned her entire attention to the home, laughing and chirping the whole day. This was Hassan's home. It was her home. When Hassan was on duty she would sit on the prayer mat saying all kinds of prayers. She had texts framed from the revealed scriptures and the sayings of the Prophet and hung them on all the walls of the house. When Hassan came home he would find her increasingly drawn to religion. Parveen's reactions forced Hassan to wonder about her more and more. A barely educated, average, middle-class woman living in a small community, what does she think and why does she behave this way? Why does she read religious and scholarly tracts? Why is she, in this day and age, becoming more and more obsessed with religion? And yet, as the rituals and ablutions to purify and cleanse grew, Parveen's face became more fresh and radiant. Soon, peace was declared and the land revealed itself in the form of a mother. At tea-time Parveen appeared different to Hassan. He began to look at her, embarrassing her with his unblinking gaze. Then he took her in his lap and she buried her face in his breast, till it seemed as if the entire universe was confined within the single, shared, warm breath of Hassan and Parveen. Eyes bathed in the clear springs of emotion sparkled, each was spellbound. Hassan broke it by asking, Pina, why are you turning so religious? I'm astonished. I am trying to thank my Creator who has given me so much. Parveen spoke with difficulty. Given me so much. She kept repeating under her breath, given me so much, given me. Hassan looked into her eyes and smiled. What has he given you, he asked mischievously. Parveen shyly lowered her eyes. Oh, I see. And he kissed and kissed her eyes, drenching her in a shower of trust and intimacy. Like the morning star a single word pulsed in her mind, victory, victory, victory. In spring the quality of air changes. Hassan got 2 promotions in quick succession. He attributed his success to Parveen's lucky star. This woman was fortunate and her honest presence ensured a bright future for him. Hassan became Parveen's worshipper. This soft-limbed, dusky woman ruled over his senses, his heart and his home simultaneously. Her behavior and her handling of household matters had so overwhelmed Hassan that he was no longer mindful of the world. Parveen combined in her person all the roles of a woman. Like a mother she knew how to upbraid him, she could tease and indulge him like a sister, and offer sacrifices and take pride in him like a wife. After his promotion Hassan was posted to another city and he moved with Parveen to a new house, far away from the world which had made her acquaintance. Both were pleased with the change. The routine of their nights and days altered and then a flower was soon to bloom in their own garden. Could anyone be more fortunate than Hassan? Peaceful days and the richness of life surged all around him. In spring the quality of air changes. Hassan got 2 promotions in quick succession. He attributed his success to Parveen's lucky star. This woman was fortunate and her honest presence ensured a bright future for him. Hassan became Parveen's worshipper. This soft-limbed, dusky woman ruled over his senses, his heart and his home simultaneously. Her behavior and her handling of household matters had so overwhelmed Hassan that he was no longer mindful of the world. Parveen combined in her person all the roles of a woman. Like a mother she knew how to upbraid him, she could tease and indulge him like a sister, and offer sacrifices and take pride in him like a wife. After his promotion Hassan was posted to another city and he moved with Parveen to a new house, far away from the world which had made her acquaintance. Both were pleased with the change. The routine of their nights and days altered and then a flower was soon to bloom in their own garden. Could anyone be more fortunate than Hassan? Peaceful days and the richness of life surged all around him. At the breakfast table, finding that Hassan was not in his usual high spirits, Parveen became anxious. Since their marriage he had not been quiet for a moment. His eyes looked burdened. Parveen felt a deep dread.
Hassan, what has happened to your eyes?
Why are they so burdened? Hassan put down his cup on the table and remained silent. He still didn't look at Parveen. She grabbed him by both arms and shook him, nearly at the point of tears herself.
Why are you silent? Why don't you tell me?
I wasn't able to sleep at night, Hassan said in a feeble voice.
Why?
Parveen asked impatiently.
Why didn't you wake me up?
I was hardly awake myself, I don't know what state I was in. I kept having the most horrifying dream. I have been weeping since then. Hassan threw his head back and looked at the ceiling. His eyes grew wet again. Hassan in tears? Parveen was amazed. This man who has played in blood on the battlefield, who has witnessed bodies piled before his eyes and triumphantly leapt over them as the victorious warrior, the courageous and brave soldier, can he be so weak and delicate?
Tell me the dream.
It'll lighten your burden. Why do you want to hear it? It'll cause you pain. You have to tell me. Hassan began to speak haltingly. There's a garden and it's springtime, he said thoughtfully, as if he was pasting snapshots in an album and recalling forgotten names. His voice had deepened. 2 birds had lost their way and I built them a nest in which they began to live happily. Then somehow the nest caught fire and their children were also in the nest. Pina, he stopped. The blaze grew and I stood weeping. When I awoke my pillow was wet. I was burdened as if I had set fire to the nest with my own hands. I am the guilty one who has caused the fire and consigned everything to the flames. I was not able to go back to sleep. Parveen was lost listening to the story and waves of anguish swept over her face. She sat silent and trembling. Last night, half asleep, she had heard the sound of Hassan's footsteps and felt him bending over her face many times, and then she had turned over and gone back to sleep. Now Hassan was telling the story and everything in the house was suddenly quiet and somber. Neither of them spoke to each other till Hassan's departure for the office. A heavy fear blanketed their hearts and they were hesitant to see each other's faces. Can people all of a sudden turn into distant strangers, like uncertain, faceless shadows? Time's slate reflected 2 such shadows, trembling, helpless and sorrowful. As he left, Hassan reminded her, be ready. Today we'll go for a long drive. I don't want that horrifying dream to be repeated tonight. Maybe walking around will make me feel better. You're looking tired as well. He stooped to kiss Parveen on the forehead on his way out and then left without doing so. There was a determination in his stride which had been absent earlier. Parveen felt a twinge and then a wave of unknown hope and longing swept over her. They set out for their outing in the early evening. Hassan was driving the jeep himself. The early evening moon shifted slowly to the west. Parveen sat quietly, clutching her locket in her fist, lost in thought. Hassan had brought her the locket this evening. On the little tablet was inscribed Allah, God's name in her fist, and in her heart a world of danger and fear. On the way a dread stillness and Hassan's silence. Where are we going? She finally asked. You know I always surprise you. Hassan spoke as little as possible. Yes, you've always amazed me. She was comforted by his response. She was so used to Hassan's ways that she did not attempt to go into any further details. Go to sleep. Hassan rested her head on his shoulders. The jeep kept moving and Parveen appeared to be asleep. Hassan stopped his jeep and very carefully helped Parveen down, as if she were made of fragile glass, and supporting her, began to walk. Perhaps this was the desired destination. It was the late evening of a chilly night. Now they were on foot. The sand was shifting beneath their feet and the moments slid slowly by. Where are you taking me, Hassan? Parveen asked once more, close to tears. She was pregnant and she couldn't walk very far. Her feet were losing their grip on the sand. But Hassan was dragging her now. The desert was silent except for the wind rustling through the bushes and the sound of shifting sand. Overhead a field of stars spanned the horizon. Hassan stopped. He held Parveen tightly to him, then kissed her and set her apart. He was panting from the journey and the heavy burden he was carrying inside him. Parbati. Go. Khuda Hafiz. He set off. A scream escaped Parbati. The dark made it difficult for them to read each other's expressions. Parbati, don't forget. You have something of mine in safekeeping. He stopped and spoke, and then his shadow disappeared behind the bushes.
Hassan! Hassan!
Parbati ran after him and fell down. Her arms fluttered in the air, her hands pressed her mouth to stifle the cries lest they rent asunder the heart of silence. Hassan had left. Shiv had left Parbati. Adam had pushed Eve alone out of paradise. At this moment she was neither Parbati nor Parveen, but just woman, a worshipper of love and the flower-bearing earth. She lay face down weeping on the desert, and her locket with Allah inscribed on it kept rolling in the sand. She was scattered by the trinity of the desert, God, Adam and Eve. Separated by politics. Hassan, Hassan, Hassan. Parbati's golden dream had ended. Night was almost over. The light of a new dawn spread its rays on the horizon. A man bending over her was saying, "Beat her to death, Yar." And with presence of mind she announced, "I am Parbati, Colonel Mehta's wife." She didn't want to die. On this side of the border she was Mrs. Mehta again. Srimati Parbati. Mehta, Colonel Mehta's wife. She had a clear dusky coloring, was petite but perfectly proportioned, and had a black mole on the left cheekbone as well as the mark of a wound aslant the brow. Her expression was sober. The government circulated her description in the newspapers and disseminated it in handbills. During the war she had set out to spy in the enemy camp. For a while she kept them informed of her whereabouts, then her world changed. Her passion and fervor, like a limpid stream, found fresh channels and a new, rich existence. This way had been opened to her by Hassan. Hassan had watered her garden. She was the mother of his unborn child. The thought of motherhood had elevated her worth in her own eyes, she felt important and splendid. She felt she had come into her own, had penetrated the secrets of her own being. She who was a person in her own right but whom people had taunted as an unproductive woman, infertile earth, her breast was full of treasures now. When she had been married to Mehta she was very young and impulsive. Mehta gave her everything except confidence. She was convinced that it was possible to have a home even without children. Parbati was justifiably proud of the Grand Colonel Mehta. Being his wife had given her a place in society, but she never stopped being the victim of people's envy and greed. Then, even as now, people remained ready to marry their daughters to Colonel Mehta. 10 years of married life went by. She was a worldly, married woman of 28 when she began to feel that there was much more for a woman to achieve than motherhood. She was constantly obsessed by one thought: she would achieve something before she died, she would achieve something before she died. War broke out with the neighboring country, and countless mothers' precious sons began to write history with their blood. For security the frontiers demanded blood, fresh blood poured into human forms, born by women and then sacrificed by them before city walls. Seeing their precious ones fall, these women could then raise their heads in pride and say, "I have a share in this earth. I have drenched it with my blood. This fertile land is my being. I am earth itself. I produce these gems and I swallow them as well." Parbati grew more and more restless. Blood coursed through her veins, vigorous and passionate. She was perpetually conscious of her low status. She would always be deprived of the honor of adding another drop to the flowing river. A drop drawn from her blood and being. How impossible this was. She could have gained the honor by sacrificing her husband, but that appeared difficult. Without him what would she be? She thought, now that fires are raging all around and life is uncertain, I could receive the news of Mehta's death any moment. Who would she lean on after Mehta's death? She would be Mehta's widow, without a medal, honor, pension or anything. She resolved that instead of this aimless existence, she would do something to ensure her name for posterity. When a woman cannot become a mother she has many other desires. Mehta's love had lost its earlier centeredness and abundance. Knowing each other, they still remained strangers. Mehta would busy himself with office business most of the time. The wife would occupy herself with social work. At night they would go to bed exhausted. Life had fallen into a rut and lost all meaning. But war brought a new quest and aspirations into their life. New windows opened on enchanting vistas. There were many opportunities for Parbati now. Mehta suggested that she become a nurse, but instead of bandaging others' wounds she longed to receive some herself. She longed to run to the front lines, to comfort the soldiers, to do battle and go tearing through the enemy lines. She kept badgering Mehta with this desire. The only opening he could find for her obsession was that she go and spy in enemy territory, make use of her beauty and intelligence, and if she had to lay down her life, well, she desired that anyway. That would immortalize her. An injection of morphine made her bear the wounds inflicted on her body, and for the sake of her country she crossed the frontier at night. Then her life began to change. Gradually soft-spoken Hassan entered the temple of her heart, made a place in it. They were spiritually one. After marrying Hassan, Parbati was reborn. Perhaps she had been created for Hassan and had traveled these long distances to arrive at this point. How much hardship she had undergone to make him hers and how much tyranny she had endured, only her heart knew. After gaining Hassan, she had put away her past life as a time in prison which had passed in hope of freedom. Hassan was the ultimate haven after the turmoil her soul had undergone, not just a man who had given her self-confidence. She who had been a criminal in everybody's perception was now witness to her own existence, her pride, her soul and emotions. Now she could say she was no less than anyone else. She too had an established goal. She was picked up from the border and transported with the utmost care to Colonel Mehta. Mehta greeted her with love and courtesy, but Parbati was not the same. She was haunted by the fear that if Mehta found out he would not treat her well at all, and it was inevitable he find out. Parbati never told her husband, but he gauged the situation. His eyes turned crimson with rage and he was like an angry hyena. "I didn't expect this of you." He was silent for a while and then said, "For the sake of the country, all right, you had no option." His tone softened. He remembered the sacrifices made by Parbati and allowed his head to rest on her shoulder. Parbati lay curled up on the bed, not answering any questions but watching the play of emotions on Mehta's face. She sat silent, as if she was a migrant from a faraway land who had stopped at the wayside inn for a few hours. Despite all that Mehta said, she was not conscious of any sense of guilt. She had committed no crime, she was sure. Mehta continued talking and in an attempt to console her said, "Don't worry. We'll get rid of it. You have been childless, we can adopt it," Parbati advised. "Useless seed, child of Amlek. I will not allow it in my home. Understand, Parbati? I have accepted you because of your love and loyalty, otherwise you're unclean, you'll have to get rid of it. Now, today or tomorrow." In a single breath Mehta had demanded, threatened and warned. He was pained at his wife's loss of honor and conscious of his deprivations. Parbati had returned from across the border with something that they had longed for. But Mehta had no part in it. And now Parbati, a lowly woman, was determined to have the upper hand over him. He could defeat her through violence. He leapt. Parbati shrieked. "You can't do this. I won't let you do it. I'll kill you." He advanced towards Parbati, both hands raised.
"Kill me then."
Parbati offered her neck. She felt Mehta's blows on her breast and sat up in pain. Legs drawn up to protect her stomach, she kept taking the blows. Kicked and pummeled, her flesh, bones and coursing blood took a beating to save the life that had taken refuge in her, to protect the race of which she was the mother. She was mother and earth and frontier, and beyond the frontier, life continued, generation succeeding generation. Life growing and burgeoning was to be protected. No, no, no. I will not let this happen. Mehta lost in every way? After this the tension between them grew. The time of confinement was drawing near. Mehta started disappearing from home for weeks. Parbati was calm in his absence. While he was away she could wait peacefully for the moment when the reward of a lifetime would be poured into her lap. Her motherhood would signify new hope, she would be overwhelmed with joy. In Mehta's absence Parbati went to hospital. She informed neither her own family nor her in-laws, but she did scribble a few lines to Mehta. It was his choice whether to maintain the relationship or break it. She had no hopes of anyone, no relationship with anyone. The whole world had disappointed her. Even Hassan. Love and emotions prosper for a while, but, faced with the demands of duty or other goals, they are either throttled by others or destroy themselves. Maintaining a relationship becomes a curse. To break relationships is a worthy act, and Parbati was breaking all relationships without asking whether it was praiseworthy or not. It was just the beginning of the journey for her. She was midway. No final decision was possible at the moment. She had seen a dream, its realization was a way off. She had still to touch it with her lips. After that she will think. After that, duty will call, and she will listen and take a decision. The ultimate moment was slowly drawing closer. She was waiting with hope, arms outstretched. Time was ticking away. New buds opened and new leaves emerged on the ancient peepal tree on the hospital lawn. Seasons change, and protected from the strong, icy blast of winter, the new plants and buds burst forth. The earth's lap became verdant, and so did Parbati's. Bathed in dew the morning dawned. As seasons change, the mornings are sad but heady. The sunshine is pale, neither clear nor bright, and its fresh, scrubbed beauty spreads and enters the human heart. It was the first day of spring and a new day for Parbati. The bearer informed her that Colonel Mehta had arrived. Parbati confidently raised her head. Mehta could not break all ties with her. He was sure of a reconciliation. He thought now that he had come back things would perhaps work out. She sat with the child clasped to her breast. Mehta entered the room smiling, but instead of reflecting softness or consideration, his eyes were fiery. Fire that sends out sparks. Parbati responded to his smile with a smile of her own and sat silently. "Let's go," Mehta ordered on entering. "Where?" "Home." "Where else?" "Come now, I've brought the car." "Have you gone crazy? Can't you see my child?" Mehta interrupted her. "You've driven me crazy, Parbati." He stepped forward. "For the sake of Bhagwan, kill these emotions. Start a new life. Learn to live with me. You have disgraced everyone. You're on a suicidal mission." Parbati didn't reply. Her mind was blank. She was not even thinking so. Meekly like a goat, she followed him. If she created a commotion in the hospital, what would people have said? With this thought she set out with Mehta. All the way Mehta was aloof, muttering under his breath as if in a state of intoxication. "Parbati. You're a woman. The Muslims call a woman fire. They are right. You are a woman. Fire. You have consumed everything, burnt it to cinders. I can't even leave you. What am I to do? Parbati, Parbati. You have led Shiv astray. Humiliated him." On reaching home, Parbati was given a comfortable bed. The servants had disappeared somewhere, so Mehta heated the food himself and fed her warm milk and biscuits. He didn't think it necessary to explain the changes she noticed in the house, and she herself was tired of playing a role. Now she wanted to sit back and watch as a spectator. There was a pleasure to it that she was just beginning to experience, to sit back in comfort and without a worry. Whatever will be will be. She had entrusted her ship to the waves and wanted to see what would happen. Afternoon deepened into evening, night fell, then daybreak approached. It was time for the lamps to be dimmed, and she lay with her eyes open. The whole night she was awake, eyes open, staring. A hand will move forward to shut out the light in her eyes now. The night passed like a serpent that has just given birth and is in search of its young to swallow them. Who are her children? The stars. Parbati couldn't think too much. She has a star-like child herself, and she is not going to allow anyone to swallow him up. He is a piece of the moon. He will shine. He will shine forth and be transformed into the sun. There was still time before sunrise. Her limbs began to relax. Why were her eyes drooping? Sleep. Sweet sleep. Drapes. Heavy drapes. Forgetfulness. She was dreaming. Mehta is here, he is searching for something by her side. The child began to cry. It was no dream. Slaps, snatching, struggle between life and death, tears and entreaties, hatred. Envy and suffocation. Defeat and a sense of guilt. I tell you, you should kill him. Mehta growled like a wildcat, who in its greed separates the heads of its young from their bodies. No. No. She sobbed and hid her child beneath her breasts. She would defend him in every way. Her body was enough. I'll leave as soon as it's morning, go far away. She was trembling with passion even as she made this confident assertion, panting out the words in smoldering rage. After that she lost consciousness of what she did. She left home. Before the evening shadows deepened, she found herself walking toward the border. A storm of emotions had driven her crazy. A madwoman was walking on the breast of the earth. Mother Earth. A unifying entity, a common human possession. She had forgotten that there are countries on this earth and countries have borders and borders are guarded. She walked on. In front of her the sun sank slowly, very slowly, into the ocean in the west. The earth and the sky were bathed in blood. On and on she walked, slowly, slowly, closer and closer and closer. A bullet whistled by, grazing her shoulder. Her arms tightened across her breast and she bowed her head. Another bullet and then another, and now she had gone very far. Many voices resounded in the atmosphere, kill, bullets rained from all sides, a storm. So many bullets for her solitary self, smoke spreading. Darkness swam before her eyes. A voice rising and falling. The soil at the border, her blood, red, warm, young and fresh, then peace, silence and the resounding echo, kill.